Welcome to Short Movie Channel. Today's movie begins with the couple, Paul and Bea, as they talk in a video about their wedding ceremony. They also share the story of how they first met and got to know each other. In the beginning, they recall a time they spent together when Bea felt sick and had to return home. At that moment, Paul proposed to her and asked for her hand in marriage. Bea was overjoyed because she loved Paul too and agreed to marry him. After their wedding, the couple heads to a forest in Canada to spend their honeymoon. They choose to stay in a simple rustic cabin in the woods, which belongs to Bea's family. Upon arriving, Bea takes Paul on a tour of the cabin, showing him around. The place is very old, and there's a bear hide hanging on the wall. Bea tells Paul that her father was a big fan of hunting and that he was the one who hunted the bear. That night, as they lie together in bed, a bright light suddenly shines through. The next morning, Paul wakes up and goes to the bear hide, seeming fascinated and obsessed with it. He asks Bea about her father and his love for hunting. Bea laughs and tells him that, as a child, she used to catch fish and frogs with her bare hands, and she really enjoyed it. In another scene, the couple is on a small boat together. Bea is very excited, while Paul appears scared of the boat and the water. Despite his fear, Bea decides to swim in the lake, but the water is extremely cold, so she changes her mind. Later, they visit a nearby restaurant, but it seems deserted. There's only one man there who looks upset and frustrated. He tells them that the restaurant is closed and angrily smashes some of the lights in the place. As Paul and Bea leave, the man calls out to Bea. It turns out he knows her. Bea takes a closer look and recognizes him. His name is Will, a childhood friend of hers from when she lived in the area with her family. She hugs him, and they reminisce about their childhood memories. Will talks to Bea about the restaurant, and explains that it belongs to his wife's family. He manages it but apologizes for his behavior, explaining that he's upset because of issues with his wife. Suddenly, his wife, Annie, appears and demands that Paul and Bea leave the restaurant immediately. Annie seems angry and unstable. Will tries to calm her down, grabbing her firmly, and apologizes to Paul and Bea for his wife's behavior, explaining that she is ill and struggling mentally. That night, back at the cabin, Bea can't stop thinking about Annie and her mental state. Paul tries to comfort her and improve her mood, suggesting that Annie might just be dealing with typical problems like any married couple. However, Bea remains uneasy, constantly thinking about Annie and her condition. In the middle of the night, while Paul and Bea were sleeping side by side on the bed, the lights in the cabin began flickering on and off. At the same time, they heard the sound of an alarm clock ringing. Paul woke up quietly, grabbed his fishing rod, and went outside to catch some fish. But as soon as he opened the door, he noticed it was still dark outside, and the sunrise was hours away. He realized that the alarm clock was broken and had gone off at the wrong time, earlier than it was supposed to. When Paul returned to the bedroom, he was shocked to find Bea missing. He started calling her name and searching for her everywhere, but there was no response, and she was nowhere to be found. That's when Paul noticed the back door of the cabin was slightly ajar. Alarmed, he stepped out of the cabin to look for her, worried for her safety. After a while, he heard the sound of something moving nearby in the woods. He followed the sound and ventured deep into the forest. Suddenly, he found Bea naked. When he touched her, she screamed at him. Paul quickly brought her back to the cabin and worked to help her regain consciousness fully. He wanted to understand what had happened and how she ended up deep in the woods in the middle of the night. Bea tried to reassure and calm him, saying she might have sleepwalked without realizing it, and that everything was fine now. But Paul remained anxious and unconvinced by her explanation. The next morning, while Bea was preparing breakfast, Paul noticed that she seemed distracted and completely unfocused, even burning the toast without realizing it. He asked her again about what was going on. Bea replied that she was fine and nothing had happened, urging him not to worry. However, Paul noticed her tone was irritated and angry, and the way she spoke to him felt strange and unfamiliar. Paul suggested they visit a doctor, but Bea refused, insisting he was overreacting and making a big deal out of nothing. Trying to lighten the mood, Paul had his coffee, and later the two went out on the boat for a ride on the lake. Paul caught a frog and started playing with it, hoping to lighten the atmosphere and make Bee laugh like she used to. But he noticed that she simply watched him silently without reacting at all. Suddenly, Bee jumped into the lake and started swimming, even though the water was extremely cold. Paul was baffled by her actions, as he couldn't understand why she was acting so differently, especially since she had never liked cold water before. When they returned to the cabin, Paul tried to talk to Bee again, hoping she would open up about what was happening and why she seemed so changed. Bee told him she was just tired and exhausted and assured him that she would be fine, asking him not to worry. Paul noticed marks on her legs, which she tried to hide from him. When he asked about them, she told him they were probably mosquito bites, as there were many mosquitoes in the area at night. Bee then said she was feeling tired and needed to rest, heading off to bed. Paul, however, couldn't shake off his unease. He remained tense and uncomfortable, sensing that something strange was going on with Bee, and she wasn't telling him the truth. Later, Paul went back to the same spot in the forest where he had found Bee the previous night. There, he discovered her nightgown, and when he picked it up, he noticed it was covered in a sticky, strange substance he couldn't identify. He also observed footprints belonging to someone else in the area, which deepened his confusion and concern. Paul returned to the cabin and found Bee standing in front of the bathroom mirror, talking to herself. He was deeply shocked by what he saw, as she appeared to be rehearsing excuses to tell him if he got close to her, just like any married couple might do. From that moment, Paul began keeping a close eye on Bee all night, becoming more convinced that something strange was happening to her, though he couldn't figure out what it was. At one point, Paul tried to approach Bee, but she pushed him away, claiming she had a headache and felt exhausted. Later, he asked her again if something had happened in the forest that night. She stuck to the same story, insisting she had been sleepwalking and that nothing had happened. However, Paul didn't believe her and became increasingly convinced she was hiding something from him, especially since she had never mentioned sleepwalking before. Paul then asked Bee to put on the nightgown he had found, but she told him it was in the laundry. This response made him even more suspicious, as he had personally found the nightgown in the forest. He began to feel as though he was living with a completely different person, somewhat unlike the Bee he had fallen in love with and married. The story shifts to another midnight scene, with Paul unable to sleep. He saw Bee get out of bed and leave the room again. This time, he followed her, only to find her coming back moments later. When he asked her where she had been, she casually replied that she had just been drinking water. She then returned to bed and fell asleep as if nothing had happened. Meanwhile, Paul was left in utter confusion, his mind racing to make sense of everything. The next night, Paul woke up to a bright light shining into the cabin. He grabbed his rifle and went outside to investigate the source of the light. He saw a shadowy figure watching him from a distance, and he fired a shot at it. However, the figure vanished instantly. Paul went back inside, locked all the doors and windows, and told Bee that someone had been watching them from outside. He vowed to track down whoever it was and find out what was going on. But Bee dismissed his concerns, insisting that he must be mistaken and that there was no one out there. Paul pressed Bee again, asking if anyone had been with her in the forest that night, but she stuck to her story. She repeated that she had been sleepwalking and that no one had been with her. Paul, however, grew increasingly suspicious that Will was the one who had been with Bee in the forest. He showed her the nightgown and confronted her, asking why she had lied to him and continued to do so. He pointed out that she had changed ever since meeting Will at the diner. Despite everything, Bee repeated her claims, saying she had been sleepwalking, didn't remember anything, and that Paul was mistaken. She also told him that she loved him and would never betray him, no matter what. That night, after they argue, each of them sleeps separately. Both feel anxious and tense. The next morning, when Paul wakes up, he finds Bee writing in a notebook. She writes her name, her husband Paul's name, her age, and their address. Paul asks her, "What are you doing? What are you writing in that notebook?" But as soon as Bee notices him, she closes the notebook quickly so he can't see what she's writing. Paul gets very upset with her, frustrated by her secrecy and the things she's hiding from him. Later, B tries to talk to him, but he doesn't respond like he used to. He feels like she's no longer the B he loves, his wife, the one he fell for. When he asks her again about the marks on her legs, B claims that they've mostly disappeared and are healing. But Paul notices she's lying. Those marks are now more prominent and worse than before. The two of them head out together and get on a boat. While in the middle of the lake, Paul tells her they need to go back home and leave this place because he doesn't feel comfortable staying there anymore. But B insists that she doesn't want to leave yet. She wants to continue their honeymoon and tells him to forget those thoughts. Suddenly, as she moves closer to Paul, her legs start bleeding. They rush back to their cabin, and Paul tells her, "We have to leave this place immediately and go to a doctor to check your legs." But B makes up excuses, refusing to leave. Paul, now at his limit, says, "There's no discussion. Pack your bags. I'm going out for a bit, and when I'm back, we're leaving right away." Paul then goes to Will and Annie's restaurant to confront Will. Outside the restaurant, Paul notices Annie acting strangely, much like B. She also has marks on her legs, just like BA's. When Paul approaches her and asks about her husband, she says Will is hiding because he's in danger. She then leaves on a boat in the lake. Paul sees a baseball cap floating in the water with blood stains on it. He enters the restaurant and notices a camera inside. When he tries to turn on the lights, they don't work. As he explores the place, he finds a notebook with details about Annie, Will, their address, and other information. Through the camera, Paul sees footage of Annie walking toward a bright light coming from the forest. He also notices the same sticky substance that was on BA's dress in the woods on Annie's notebook. When Paul steps outside, he realizes someone is watching him from the shadows. Paul returns to their cabin and starts reading BA's notebook. He finds notes similar to the ones Annie wrote in her notebook. Paul confronts B and asks why she and Annie wake up in the middle of the night and go deep into the forest. He also asks about the bright light. B replies, "I'm trying to protect you." This only makes Paul more suspicious. He asks for the car keys, but B locks herself in the bathroom. When Paul breaks the door down, he finds her hurting herself and bleeding heavily. He restrains her, ties her up on the bed, and starts asking her questions about things that happened between them. But B either doesn't remember or gives him the wrong answers. Suddenly, she screams and says she feels something moving inside her. When Paul pulls her dress up, he finds a strange, worm-like creature inside her. He demands an explanation, but B cries and refuses to say anything. Eventually, she confesses. "I saw the same bright light you saw and followed it into the woods. There, I encountered creatures with strange appearances. I tried to run and escape, but they attacked me. When you found me naked, you thought I had something going on with Will." She continues, "I wanted to tell you the truth, but those creatures warned me that if you knew anything, they would kill you." Paul doesn't believe her and says, "We need to leave now." As he searches for the car keys, B tells him, "We can't leave now," and insists he watch their wedding video. Suddenly, the bright light appears again. B tells him, "You need to hide from them before they kill you." She then knocks him unconscious. The story cuts to B tying Paul up and taking him on a boat to the middle of the lake. She attaches weights to his legs, saying she'll hide him underwater so the creatures can't reach him. Paul tries to escape, but it's too late. She throws him into the lake, and he drowns. Later, BA's condition worsens. Her skin starts peeling off like a snake shedding its skin. She sits alone in the dark, watching their wedding video. The bright light appears again, and B joins Annie, who looks just like her now. Together, they head into the forest toward the bright light, disappearing into its depths. Here we know that in that forest there is a curse that befalls all women. And that's how today's movie ends. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel if you did.